Good morning, everyone. My name is Umer Javed, and I'm Senior Vice President for Spectrum at CTIA. Our topic today is Spectrum and U.S. leadership. So let me take a minute here and set that up. We are in a moment of transition. The United States led the world in last generation 4G wireless technologies. This was truly a global technology. Over 5 billion mobile subscribers used 4G cell phones over mostly the same spectrum bands, creating markets for wireless technologies that transcended national borders. These international agreements on spectrum helped make mobile phones one of the most successful consumer devices in history. Now, as we deploy next generation 5G networks, there is serious debate about whether the United States should continue to align with other countries on how it is using spectrum. The one thing we know for sure is that other countries are continuing to work together to make more spectrum available to close the digital divides within their borders and seek out technology leadership. What that means for the United States, well, that's our topic. We are pleased to have with us today Tejas Rao. Tejas is the Managing Director and Global 5G Offering Lead with Accenture and one of the principal authors of a new report commissioned by CTIA. It is called Advancing U.S. Wireless Excellence, the Case for Global Spectrum Harmonization. Tejas, thanks for joining us. Let me start by saying that Accenture has a global view of spectrum policy and a window into how 5G wireless networks are being deployed in the US. So let's start there, and would love to hear what you're seeing in the way of new and important trends in spectrum, both in the US and globally.
Hey, Mayor, thanks for having me. Appreciate you guys taking the time. Yeah, I know. I think from an Accenture perspective, as we look at spectrum policy, we've had a long-standing partnership with CTIA looking at this topic. Even a couple of years ago, we wrote a paper around spectrum allocation, looking in detail in the U.S. of an analysis of where do we think radio spectrum allocation is across key stakeholders. And largely, a couple of years ago, we kind of said the same thing, which is what's in the paper that we're talking about, that in order to accelerate kind of innovation and kind of drive towards industry transformation and unlock kind of the true value of 5G, we need more and more mid-band spectrum, right? And so I think this topic here is kind of in line with what we recommended previously. Can we start to kind of drive benefits across and leveraging kind of harmonization as a way to start to accelerate, infrastructure deployment in some of these key bands?
That need for spectrum is so important. We see it in sort of the demand for data and how quickly it's growing in the United States. The traffic over wireless networks grew 40% last year, which is sort of the largest year-over-year growth we've seen. So as we're kind of thinking about how do you keep pace with that, maybe let's start with, you mentioned harmonization as a potential tool. What does it mean for spectrum to be harmonized? What are some of the ways that sort of harmonization comes about?
Yeah, I mean, I think harmonization really refers to it, when countries are aligning their spectrum policies, and it's primarily aimed at improving, what I call roaming and communication across the world. We're so used to, using our mobile phones in every country. We kind of forget that requires a level of coordination across a lot of countries in terms of what bands we start to use for wireless communication. So specifically, I think spectrum harmonization really refers to the actions that a national regulatory body would take similar on kind of what similar bands are going to be used for similar use in their country and across countries. Right. So I think spectrum harmonization is really what I kind of think of it as an international activity, making allocation decisions. But most of those decisions are at the national level. So it's key that we start to kind of coordinate across policymakers, across countries that are weighing kind of these domestic priorities against the context of a broader international spectrum agreement.
So in addition to sort of your phone working in other countries and being able to roam, the key finding from your report is that up to $200 billion in economic benefit is at risk here in the United States if we aren't able to harmonize. So can you unpack that for us and explain what those benefits are and where they come from?
Yeah, I mean, I think the way we kind of looked at the analysis, right? I mean, there's probably a couple of areas that are key in terms of unpacking the benefits for making sure that we're harmonized from a spectrum perspective. The analysis kind of went into areas of kind of overall, as we look at the wireless technology, the R&D efforts and the development of not only the network equipment providers and the equipment that they're making to enable 5G, but also the consumer products and devices that are in that ecosystem. And so as we look at harmonization, there's a direct benefit for all of those vendors that are producing equipment, whether that's network infrastructure equipment, radios, consumer devices, in terms of economies of scale. If we start to harmonize across brands, then that gives them efficiencies not only in their R&D capabilities, but also in production, simplifying kind of the devices and the bill of materials that are in the devices, and creating an efficiency around production, inventory management, and lastly, as they think about certifying these devices in each of the countries and the effort that it takes to test and certify. So all of those key drivers are kind of one area of benefit that we looked at as we looked at kind of what would it take for us to kind of drive an acceleration in this kind of harmonization. And so, of the 200 billion that we called out, 23 to 44 billion of that over 10 years was really attributed towards this direct benefit for the wireless technology vendor ecosystem in producing either infrastructure or devices. And then I think the second area really drives towards what I call, unlocking innovation in industry use cases, leveraging kind of this next G of technology as we think about 5G and what it could unlock in all the various industries. There's a secondary benefit of taking a leadership position and driving innovation, establishing technology as a US leadership position. What does that look like? And then looking at it from a lens of just for the US, do we think that there's a benefit and a broader economic benefit for unlocking kind of early and securing, maintaining kind of this wireless leadership that the US has had within 5G. And as we think about, looking at the 4G world, there was a significant amount of economic value that we thought we would unlock with this kind of next generation of technology. So we spend a lot of time looking at the economic benefits. And so when you start to unpack that, then the leadership, the unlocking innovation, accelerating kind of digital transformation in these industries, leveraging kind of 5G is another area that we think has got a lot of economic benefits. And that, leads us to about another 125 billion to about 150 billion over 10 years. And so when you add those two areas together, that's where we're kind of leaning towards the $200 billion over 10 years as kind of the total benefit of making sure that we harmonize it. And that 200 billion is specific to not the global ecosystem, but just what it means to be leading in the US, leveraging some of these kind of spectrum that the international community is looking at.
If the United States wanted to take advantage of this opportunity, and certainly other countries are probably looking at that and wanting to lead as well. But for the United States, your report also looked at where some of the key opportunities are in terms of what are the frequencies that the U.S. could now take advantage of if it wanted to pursue that $200 billion in economic benefit. So would love to hear kind of your thoughts on where are the opportunities, which bands do you think hold the most promise for the United States, and what are their prospects for the kind of harmonization that you're talking about?
The report really focused in around kind of three bands that give us an opportunity in the US to better align what we do with 5G spectrum holdings with the rest of the world. I think there's the lower 3 gigahertz, the 4 gigahertz, and then the 7 to kind of 8.5 gigahertz bands were what we looked at in terms of potential opportunities. And of course, the lower 3, what we talk about the lower 3, it's the 3.3 to 3.45. And the upper portion, when we think about the 4, the 4.8, and the 4.95 is key because that's already established as an international harmonized band for 5G. But it's not yet allocated in the US. So it's important that the US take, a more concerted effort to accelerate kind of unlocking those bands, given that it's already been harmonized in the international areas. Why don't we start to kind of use that as a way to kind of accelerate and provide more mid-band spectrum in the 3 versus kind of the piecemeal approach that we've been taking in kind of the 3 gigahertz range, right? We've got kind of that complex sharing of spectrum in the 3.55 to 3.7. And then, we've got what's left over from the C-band auctions as kind of our core 5G deployment today. Could we make, the lower part of that, which is the 3.3 to 3.5 gigahertz available, that should help accelerate, additional capacity coverage requirements that a lot of the operators have. So that's going to make an additional 150 megahertz available in that 3.3 to 3.55. I think that's key, right? That would drive immediate benefits that other countries that have already allocated the spectrum are going to start to use. And then there's also strong alignment, I think, on the 4. So when we talk about 4.8 to 4.94 gigahertz range, that's already kind of has alignment in the national stage. So let's kind of make sure that we're lined up with that and start to make that available. And I think as we think about it, should we, as other countries are accelerating, looking at some of these bands, how does the US start to think about other bands to start to take a leadership position? And so the middle part of 4, when we talk about 4.4 to 4.8 gigahertz, or the range of 7 to 8.5 gigahertz, that's starting to gain momentum in the international areas as well. And so, there's been early movements that we've seen on international around that 4.4 gigahertz band that's increasing kind of ability to provide additional capacity for 5G networks to handle the higher data traffic rates. And as we think about the evolution of all of these Gs, 5G is going to handle a lot more technology as we move into this data and AI space. And so I think it's critical for the US to seize the opportunity to allocate more of a contiguous portion of the band for these higher end, high bandwidth, low latency types of use cases that we still going to start to see being adopted in the various vertical industries. So, we talked about the 4, and I think the other area that might be interesting is really allocating a more of a significant block of contiguous spectrum in the 7.125 to 8.5 gigahertz, which would be kind of, I think, the first step if the US is kind of accelerating, making sure that they take a leadership position. That could be a bold area of leadership for the US to kind of go into the next round of conference discussions to talk a little bit about also thinking about the 7 to 8.5 gigahertz.
Well, the encouraging part of that, I think, is that at least 2 of the bands that you talked about are also part of the administration's national spectrum strategy. So it sounds like there's a real opportunity if we can deliver that strategy, deliver on that vision to achieve some of the benefit that you found in your paper. Well, I know we're coming close to the end of our time, but I wanted to offer you an opportunity for any closing thoughts about the paper or about spectrum generally.
Thank you for the time, by the way. And as Accenture, we're proud of the partnership we've had with CTIA in developing this kind of thought leadership and points of view. I think it's important to kind of understand that we're at kind of my mind at a fork in the road in terms of continued leadership in 5G and what we see as just the accelerated growth in data traffic. I don't think is going to diminish, and so keeping up to the pace of growth in data, but providing kind of next generation technology that optimizes, the level of data traffic that's coming through is going to be critical for both the US and for kind of the innovation that we think is required in the industries to really start to drive transformation. And so I think, the success of the US is really going to be deploying 5G more broadly in this mid-band spectrum, creating more of a harmonized, contiguous set of spectrum bands that operators can have access to so that they can continue to invest in the infrastructure while unlocking the innovation on some of these future generation use cases around wireless, right? And as we move towards, most of the deployments starting to be completed, there's still the need to kind of drive more capacity, drive more coverage, and that requires more spectrum. And so I think, the continued focus around making spectrum available, allowing operators to continue to deploy capital more efficiently, and then starting to kind of, use wireless technology, start unlocking kind of the innovation from a digital perspective is going to be key. And we've seen even just, in the last year or two, the acceleration of the adoption of fixed wireless access, right? And providing broadband connectivity into the home using wireless technology. I mean, that scale and acceleration it's pretty incredible. And so as we think about, what else could we do when we have a expanded device ecosystem, right, into this 5G network, we'll start to kind of have purpose-built devices that are starting to unlock things in industries that, cloud, edge, data and AI and 5G could unlock, right? So I'm excited about, where the technology is going, continued kind of focus around making sure that the spectrum is available is going to be key.
Well, thank you, Tejas. Really appreciate you walking through that with us. The report, again, is Advancing U.S. Wireless Excellence, the Case for Global Spectrum Harmonization. And what we heard today is that there's a real opportunity for the United States to work with its allies around the world to free up more mid-band spectrum and realize up to $200 billion over the next 10 years in economic benefit. So thank you to everyone for tuning in as well.